All right, but we begin in New York, where a grand jury has been convened in the case of hush money payments made to adult film star Stormy Daniels by Donald Trump in 2016. That's according to two sources familiar with the situation, confirming the development to NBC News, which was first reported by the New York Times. The Times reports Manhattan District Attorney Alvin Bragg started presenting evidence to a grand jury yesterday, centering on a $130,000 payment to Daniels. A spokeswoman for the Manhattan DA and an attorney for the former president both declined to comment to us on the matter. Former President Trump himself issuing a statement on his social media platform yesterday, responding to the reports of a grand jury, calling it, you guessed it, the continuation of a witch hunt against him. Trump has denied having an affair with Daniels, but he acknowledged he did repay, he says, Cohen the $130,000. Let's bring in MSNBC chief legal correspondent and anchor, host of The Beat on MSNBC every night, Ari Melber, and state attorney from Palm Beach County, Florida, Dave Ehrenberg. Good morning to you both. Ari, I'll begin with you. Surprised, first of all, by this move out of the Manhattan DA, and what are the implications of a grand jury being impaneled in this case?
Great questions, Willie. Grand jury is the real deal. This is not some leak. This is not some statement of possible action. This is very far along. The New York Times, which wrote the story in this headline here, used the term dramatic escalation, and that's what this is. As for the underlying charges, let's be very precise. These are not the most serious charges Donald Trump has faced. In terms of what we know different prosecutors' office at the local and federal level have looked at. It's not a case, for example, that touches on the violence of the insurrection or complex alleged financial crimes or even obstruction of justice, which at the federal level, many people felt in the Mueller report was identified in multiple instances that were not ever charged in any traditional way. Having said that, if we're a nation of laws and he is no longer the president, then he could be up for this type of DA enforcement just like anyone else. I interviewed DA Bragg when he convicted Trump CFO Weisselberg. I asked him about these other open issues, and they said they would follow the facts. And so I think what you see here, Willie, if you're a viewer going, wait a minute, this seems old, thought this was already dealt with. Is this really the most serious thing facing Donald Trump? I think this is one of those times where if they keep going, we're seeing that they're more moved by the evidence, that they may have evidence that ties this really directly to Donald Trump, to his state of mind, to his actions, and potentially to him signing or doing things at a physical document level, that they may feel it's a stronger case, for example, than the Trump org case, where there were a lot of allegations flying around. They clearly convicted his CFO, but he seemed to be at a distance from it. And so I think it's really a legal lesson, if you want to look at it that way, that sometimes it's not how big is the allegation, it's how tight is the evidence against the individual you might be pursuing if they go forward.
So, Ari, as you know very well, a DA is not going to seat a grand jury unless he believes he can get an indictment. So if that is the case, if there is an indictment here from this grand jury, what happens next?
On a case like this, it would be potentially something like 1 or 2 counts. It might be a campaign finance violation, coupled with something like basically, do they have evidence? I want to say precisely, do they have evidence that there was a scheme, a furtive scheme to mislead the government or some other authority? If you charge someone on that, they're a citizen. The fact that they used to be president is not supposed to matter. So they could be booked in a New York arraignment like anyone else. They could be out on bond, and the process would go forward. And for those people who say, gosh, maybe this shouldn't be dealt with ultimately with a prison sentence, that's something that, if you're a first-time offender and you litigate, that's something that's dealt with through the trial process. Again, for anyone who's looking at these photos of, we remember the fact that this individual was in the White House, that is, under the rules, not supposed to be a get-out-of-jail-free card for the rest of their lives in local court. So the question is, did he do it? He would be legally presumed innocent if booked.
You know, I always wondered why the world just seemed to move past a candidate paying hush money to a porn star and campaign finance violations with this tawdry angle and this amount of money. And I guess they haven't. And I guess this must be, as Ari, you have pointed out, incredibly serious and incredibly terrible news for Donald Trump. You would think this alone would be overwhelming to deal with, just all the legal angles and possibilities here. But in addition to this latest grand jury probe by New York prosecutors, there are others. The Department of Justice looking into the removal of government documents from the White House, which were taken to Mar-a-Lago after Trump left office, and then he held on to them. He wouldn't give them back. Investigators are assessing how these documents were stored, who may have had access to them, and a grand jury in Washington has been hearing evidence in that investigation. Trump claims he was raided. Actually, he was ignoring a subpoena and didn't give the documents. That is a massive case potentially against Donald Trump, stealing documents from the U.S. government. There's also a special counsel investigating Trump as the federal probe accelerates into whether the former president should face criminal charges for efforts to overturn the 2020 election. This as it goes on. The January 6th committee made a criminal referral against Donald Trump in December for illegally engaging in a conspiracy to make false statements to Congress by submitting fake electoral certificates. This could be criminal. The panel presented its finding as hard evidence that Trump and his associates committed crimes, particularly by creating fake electors. That alone would be bad. Trump also faces separate civil lawsuits over the January 6th riot. An insurrection, seditious conspiracy is legit in many of the cases that are happening as a result of January 6th. Meanwhile, in Georgia, remember Georgia? Prosecutors are looking into alleged attempts to overturn the election results there. The criminal investigation was open after the disclosure of an hour-long call. Remember that call between the former president and Georgia Secretary of State Brad Raffensperger, where he was like, I just need a couple hundred more votes. Get them for me. That's bad. In New York, Attorney General Letitia James has sued Trump and the Trump Organization, saying it misled banks and tax authorities about the value of assets to get loans and tax benefits. And that lawsuit is pending. My God, Trump is also being sued by former magazine writer E. Jean Carroll for defamation in 2019 after he denied her allegation that he raped her in the 1990s in a New York City department store. A judge in that case recently rejected Donald Trump's efforts to dismiss the lawsuit. So, Dave Ehrenberg, my question to you is this. Do you know of anybody with this many legal efforts, legal investigations, potential indictments, potential criminal prosecution against him?
No, that's a fast crowd to hang around with, Mika. I don't know anyone like that. I think, though, when it comes to this Manhattan case, it's probably the 4th out of 4 as far as the strongest case against Trump. I think the documents case is by far the best case for prosecutors. There's a direct tie between Trump and the documents. And for those who think that, well, Biden did it and Pence did it, look, it's not the possession of the documents. It's the refusal to give them back, or you could put it on a bumper sticker. It's the obstruction, stupid. I mean, it's simple. As far as the others, January 6th could be a good case. The Fulton County DA has a potentially good case. I mean, they've got Trump on tape. This one in Manhattan is not as strong. As Ari said, the penalties aren't very harsh. I mean, even if he's convicted of a felony, you can get up to 4 years in prison, and the judge is likely to give him a lot less. So I don't think it's the best case. Plus, they're going to depend on Michael Cohen, who has really been out there to try to make amends for his misdeeds. But, you know, the defense lawyers for Trump are going to skewer him for lying to government officials, for being an ex-con, and for having an axe to grind against his former boss. And he's the key witness in that case. And then ultimately, falsification of business records in New York is just a misdemeanor. You've got to tie it to another crime for it to be a felony, like an election crime. But the problem there, Mika, is that the election was a federal election, and these are state prosecutions. And so can a state prosecutor enforce a federal law like that? It's going to be tough. So I think of the 4 cases, this one in Manhattan is the least of the 4.
All right, Melber, how many attorneys do you need to handle all these legal cases against one? I mean, does he have like 100 lawyers?
I mean, Mika, I think at this point, his lawyers have lawyers. That's literally the case in Georgia, and I should say the Mar-a-Lago probe. I mean, I hope, you know how the internet works, Mika. I hope somebody cuts and replays what you just walked through, because it speaks to just the way that this individual has tried to both use and exploit everything in the justice system to delay, obfuscate, and hide. And so you have a lot of these things running over the long time. He has lawyers who are in trouble. He has lawyers who've basically tried to get out from having to continue some of these cases. And he has experience. I'll say this as fair as possible. Donald Trump has shown he has a lot of experience trying to outrun and avoid legal oversight, regulation, and the criminal justice process. People can do with that what they will. I'm not convicting him here on air. We have a process for that. But I certainly wouldn't call it a good sign. I certainly wouldn't call it a positive when you have someone who appears to have specialized over many years in trying to avoid oversight, accountability, and transparency. And by contrast, Mika, there are other people who say, if accused of something, they sometimes say, let's get into it. Let me turn over the materials. Let me prove my innocence. That hasn't exactly been the approach.